Racism in global development is a problem. It is a deep systemic issue.
We like to measure things in global development, but while there are many indices measuring gender equality in the sector, there are none focused on measuring racial equity. The Racial Equity Index is the very first index to measure racial equity in global development and hold the sector accountable for dismantling the systemic racism it was created to uphold.
We are a BIPOC-led collective.
We are global.
We are anti-racist.
Together, we collectively have over 50 years of experience working in the sector.
Every single person in our collective has experienced racism in global development.
The Racial Equity Index is groundbreaking and innovative, and will serve as a metric for the sector in order to reduce harm and make meaningful impact in areas of racial equity.
Success looks like racial equity intentionally incorporated and integrated by organizations in a sustained manner.
Success looks like permanently shifting the dialogue around racial equity in the sector, recognizing that racial inequity and injustices sit at the root of global development.
Success looks like dismantling of systemic racism in global development, and instead creating a more just and equitable sector.
Success looks like more Black, Indigenous, and people of color in senior roles across the sector.
We are
the Racial Equity Index.
Hi, everybody. This is our second podcast for the Racial Equity Index. Hi, Tina. How are you doing?
Hi, Emma. I was just about to take a sip of my tea when you asked how I was doing. So I'm doing well. It is a very rainy day in London, and literally as we started recording this podcast, the rain started coming down in sheets, and it's making quite a lovely noise as it hits my loft windows. It's quite a calming sound, which is quite nice.
That does sound like a nice calming sound, and I hope you're able to take a sip of tea now as I'm talking. I'm reflecting back to our weekly working group call that we had on Friday. Today, by the way, is Tuesday, so it's just a couple days later. And there was something, I don't know quite the word for it, extraordinary, poignant, remarkable in the markedness of it that happened on Friday in our call. And I wondered if you wanted to reflect on that with me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, that replaying back that meeting, that's kind of taken up a lot of my brain power over this weekend, just because it was quite extraordinary. And I think that the kind of, I guess there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about as it relates to that meeting that kind of stood out for me. One was the degree of openness and vulnerability that everyone stepped into that space with, which I think we always do in these meetings or in these group sessions, but particularly on Friday, that kind of vulnerability that everyone brought into the space then resulted in the creation of, I think you called it a comfortable silence that we were all able to sit in, because we were talking about some really, as we always do, some really challenging topics, but this time around they were challenging in a slightly different way because they were so incredibly personal. And for me, it was difficult for me to verbalize just what I was feeling in that moment as we were talking about these topics. And so I had to sit in silence. And I was very grateful for the fact that you all welcomed that silence, and we sat in silence for a good few minutes on that call, and it was, as you said, a comfortable silence, one that I don't think I experience a lot, especially in this work that we do, but one that I was really appreciative of being able to sit in and share with you all.
I too have been reflecting on the call on Friday, and I think the thing that is striking me most is how deep we get as a working group, as a collective, in each of our calls, and the comfortability that we have with each other, but also the trust. And I think that's one of the big things that's continuing to just hit me in waves, is there is a deep trust here that we have with each other to allow and to know that we have this space to be able to say, I can't speak right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I was just thinking about connected to that was, in this anti-racism and anti-oppression work, we don't necessarily have, we're not given, we don't allow many of those opportunities to be able to say, I can't speak right now. Because a lot of our work is about speaking, right? It's about being vocal, it's about being loud, it's about amplifying, it's about advocating. And so we don't have many of those moments to kind of sit in silence and to be quiet, even though there's strength in that, there is value in that. And I've just really been thinking about how we can incorporate more of, a politics of silence into the work that we do, and what that might look like, and how, I guess more importantly, how we can get comfortable doing that, because silence is quite hard. Sitting in silence is quite hard. It's something that I try to introduce into my practice, and it's really hard for myself. It's really hard for, the organisations and individuals that I work with. So how can we, get more comfortable with silence? How can we create more comfortable silences? And how can we, make that part of our arsenal, really?
I think this is such an incredible and valuable point, Tina, in that, so much of what you're speaking to is this rush that not only the global development space, but I think a lot even of the corporate world is facing, in the rush, to have build their ERG groups, figure out, their JEDI, and EDI plans, do their organizational assessments, find the gaps in terms of equity that they're missing, figure out the solutions. There's such a rush, to figuring this racial equity, figuring out anti-racism, and we've seen this even within the Racial Equity Index. When we started, a couple of years ago, we were on meetings with people who were rushing through within the global development space, who are rushing through this analysis work of what does racial equity actually mean? When we're talking about racial equity, what does it actually mean within global development? It's taken us almost 2 years to get to a place where we're comfortable even saying, here are the indicators, here are the subcodes. But when we started, I remember clearly this one discussion with an individual in global development that was, working on some sort of mapping tool. And, and I asked her, I said, what is the rush? There's such an urgency, and you're not taking really the time to really think about this in a holistic way. And it's a disservice, and it's causing further violence. And she said, we have to rattle the cages, and the ability, I think two things that are coming to me right now is, one, white supremacy and white supremacy culture, especially within global development, forces us. It's like there's this forced urgency. We have to constantly be on the move. We have to constantly have a solution. We have to constantly, be able to provide, our expertise. And there's no care. There's no awareness of the reinforcement of cycles of violence that causes. And just to be silent, just to, I'm thinking about, how does this show up in your work? with organizations? Do people sit there like waiting to go off of mute and go, no, I really need to say something? What is your experience in that?
Yeah, I mean, what I've noticed is that people are often, I would say, maybe surprised or taken aback when I introduce the idea of holding silent spaces in this work. Not because they are entirely against the idea, but I think because they've never really been encouraged to think about silence as, something powerful. There's an innate fear and a desire to fill the silence, because it goes back to what you're saying, the need to be active, the need to be constant, the need to be loud, because that's how you demonstrate that you are, that's how you demonstrate your value. That's how you demonstrate the work that you're doing is valuable. So it's often, a surprise, because they haven't really been encouraged to do that. But when they do start to embrace that, there's an initial level of discomfort, but then it slowly starts to become comfortable. We start to create that comfortable silence. I will say it's a practice, so meaning it's not just something, the ability to sit in silence and to create that comfortable silence isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that you continually have to work at. But it's so beneficial, and especially for this work that we do, for this work where we're trying to dismantle centuries of, harmful, oppressive practice and systems. It's necessary to kind of continue with this practice of trying to create, or to identify the power in lots of different things, including silence.
So true, Tina, in so many ways. And I go back to our call on Friday, and that we had, and we just people just logged off of Zoom when they were ready. They left the space when they were ready. No one said goodbye. No one came off of mute. They just left when they were ready. And that's how we closed out the call. And for me, I remember just feeling so in awe of all of us and grateful for all of us, but just at peace because of the exposed vulnerability that there was for many of us on that call. Just the peace that we were able to be seen and be held in that moment, even though we were all virtual.
Yeah, it was quite beautiful, I have to say. And that feeling kind of just stayed with me, for the rest of the day into the weekend. There's something so easy about it. And I think that ease comes when, you are able to create these communities of care that I think we've been able to do with our collective. These communities of care which allow for those moments of pause and those moments of silence, those moments of reflections, those moments of just being without any of that extra pressure to, again, demonstrate a particular kind of value or particular kind of benefit. So yeah, I really, really appreciated our call on Friday, and just appreciate the, the community of care that we've built.
100%, Tina. And I think that that's a good place to stop. And just with everything that you said, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Ma.